"Excuse me, could you grab us more champagne from the bar?" The woman in the designer gown thrust her empty glass toward me like I was invisible. I stood there in my best dress, the only nice one I owned, frozen. Behind me, a familiar laugh cut through the noise. My sister Diane's voice dripped with cruel amusement. "Some people just look the part, don't they?" Other guests turned to stare. My face burned. "My name is Maya. I'm 52 years old, and that moment, at my son's law school gala, wasn't even the worst part of the night." Let me back up. I raised my son Daniel alone from the time he was 3 years old. His father Trevor and I divorced when Daniel was still in diapers. For 28 years, I worked as a school secretary. Steady job, modest income, nothing glamorous. I never had designer clothes or luxury vacations, no country club memberships or fancy cars. But I had grit, I had determination, and I had Daniel. My family never let me forget what they saw as my failures. My sister Diane married rich. Trevor remarried too, a woman named Vanessa who wore diamonds like armor. They all treated me like I'd settled for less, like I was less. But while they were busy judging me, I was busy raising an incredible son. I put Daniel through undergrad with scholarships, my own savings, and countless late nights helping him edit essays. He got into a top-tier law school on pure merit. Not connections, not money, merit. I wasn't rich. I didn't have their connections. But I had something they'd never know about. Something they'd never see coming. If you've ever been judged by your clothes instead of your character, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next proved that appearances mean nothing. The gala was Daniel's law school's annual donor and achievement event. He'd invited me as his guest. I'd saved for months to buy the dress I wore that night. Department store, not boutique. Felt out of place the second I walked in. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and silk tablecloths. Women wore gowns that cost more than my monthly rent. Men laughed in custom suits, swirling whiskey in crystal glasses. And then I saw them. Trevor stood near the bar with Vanessa on his arm. She was dripping in diamonds. Her dress probably cost more than my car. They were acting like they'd funded Daniel's entire education. The truth? They'd barely contributed. A few hundred here and there when it was convenient. My sister Diane was there too, with her son who was also a law student. Struggling academically, but she never mentioned that part. I smoothed my dress and searched for my seat. That's when the dean's wife approached me. She smiled, polite but distant. "Excuse me, could you bring more champagne to table 7? My mouth opened to correct her. Before I could, Diane appeared beside me. Her smile was sharp as a knife. "Oh, don't worry, she's used to serving people. It's basically what she's done her whole life." Vanessa and Trevor laughed. Vanessa tilted her head, fake sympathy in her eyes. "Wait, you actually came? I told Trevor you'd feel uncomfortable here." Heat rushed to my face. An usher appeared at my elbow. "Ma'am, are you on the guest list?" "Yes, I'm..." "She's at the back tables," Diane interrupted. "Family guest." The usher nodded and gestured toward the far corner. Away from the stage, away from the spotlight. My name was on the list. I'd seen it. But not where they thought. I followed the usher, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I sat at the assigned table, swallowing the humiliation, swallowing the hurt. Around me, guests chatted and laughed. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. The program was about to begin, and I wasn't going anywhere. During cocktail hour, a photographer gathered law students and their families. I watched from a distance as Trevor, Vanessa, and Diane clustered around. Daniel. They posed, smiling like a perfect family. I started to approach. Vanessa physically stepped in front of me. "Oh, we're doing immediate family first. You can do a separate one later." Daniel's face flushed. He looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Trevor didn't defend me. He never did. I stepped back, biting the inside of my cheek. The camera flashed. They laughed and hugged Daniel. I stood alone, 10 feet away, invisible. When we finally sat down for dinner, the conversation turned to money. It always did with them. Someone at the table asked about the investments parents make in their children's futures. Vanessa jumped in immediately. "We created an opportunity fund for Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with pride. The fund was minimal, recent, barely a gesture, but she made it sound like they'd handed him a fortune. Diane chimed in next. "My husband's connections have been invaluable. Networking is everything in law." A woman across the table turned to me. "And what about you, Maya? What did you contribute?" I opened my mouth. Diane cut me off. "Oh, Maya's contribution was more moral support. She's a school secretary. Steady job, but, limited means." Trevor nodded, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "We all do what we can with what we have." The table fell silent. Pitying glances slid my way. I said nothing, just gripped my water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Then came the announcement about the VIP reception, a private event after the program for major donors and distinguished guests. Diane's face lit up. "Oh, we'll be at that. Our donation tier gets us in." She turned to me, voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Maya, you'll probably want to head out after the speeches anyway, right? These events aren't really your scene." Vanessa nodded, adjusting her necklace. "Yes, it's really just for donor families." I glanced at the VIP list posted near the entrance. I'd seen my name there earlier, right at the top, but I stayed quiet. "I think I'll stay for the whole program," I said calmly. Diane and Vanessa exchanged smirks, like I was a child who didn't understand her place. My hands trembled in my lap, but I kept my face smooth. I thought of Daniel, of every sacrifice I'd made, the early mornings, the late nights, the times I chose his textbooks over my own needs. They had no idea, and I was done being silent. What they didn't know, what I'd never told any of them, was that I graduated from the same law school 30 years ago. I was a first-generation student, top of my class. I passed the bar on my first try, but I never practiced law. I got pregnant with Daniel. Trevor pressured me to stay home. Then the marriage collapsed, and I needed stability. I took the school secretary job so I could be present for my son, so I could give him the childhood I never had. But I stayed quietly connected to the law school over the decades. I made small donations when I could. 5 years ago, I received an inheritance from my late mentor, a professor who'd believed in me when no one else did. I used a significant portion to establish a scholarship fund, the Winters First Generation Scholarship Fund. Winters was my maiden name. Daniel knew about it, but Trevor and Diane had never made the connection. They didn't know this was my school, my legacy. Tonight's gala honored major donors and distinguished alumni. My name was on the program. I'd seen it weeks ago. I kept it secret, not for drama, but because I never needed their validation. In about 10 minutes, they were going to hear my name. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going to make myself smaller to make them comfortable. The program began. Dean Richardson stepped up to the podium. We'd corresponded for years about the scholarship fund. He caught my eye and gave a warm, knowing smile. Diane noticed. "Do you know the dean?" "We've met," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. During a break between speeches, a young woman approached our table. She was radiant, mid-20s, in a simple but elegant dress. "Ms. Winters?" I looked up. "I've been hoping to meet you tonight," she said, her voice full of genuine warmth. Your scholarship changed my life. My throat tightened. I'm first gen too, she continued. Without your fund, I wouldn't be here. Before I could respond, her friends pulled her away laughing. She waved and disappeared into the crowd. Diane stared at me. What was that about? Just someone being kind, I said. Trevor and Diane exchanged uneasy glances. Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. She probably has you confused with someone else. But doubt flickered in their eyes. Daniel leaned close to me. Mom, are you okay? I squeezed his hand under the table. I'm perfect, sweetheart. The program resumed. Dean Richardson returned to the podium. And now, he said, his voice warm and commanding, we come to a very special recognition. Diane sat up straighter, preening. She expected her modest donation to be called. Vanessa adjusted her jewelry, looking smug. I sat calmly, my heart pounding but my face serene. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Tonight, Dean Richardson continued, we honor someone whose generosity and legacy embody the very spirit of this institution. Trevor shifted in his seat. 30 years ago, she graduated top of her class, a first-generation student who overcame every barrier. Something flickered in Trevor's expression. Confusion. Recognition. She went on to build a life of service, raising a son who now walks these same halls. Daniel's eyes widened. He turned to me, realization dawning. 5 years ago, she established the Winters First Generation Scholarship Fund, supporting 15 students to date. Diane gasped audibly. Her face went white, then flushed red. Winters, my maiden name. Tonight, we recognize her as a major donor and this year's distinguished alumna. The room held its breath. Please welcome Maya Winters. Thunderous applause erupted. The entire room rose to its feet. I stood slowly, smoothing my department store dress. I walked toward the stage, my head high. As I passed our table, I saw them. Diane's mouth hung open, her face burning with humiliation. Vanessa looked frozen, her face pale and sick. Trevor stared, visibly stunned, his expression caught between shock and shame. And Daniel, my beautiful son. Tears streamed down his face as he clapped harder than anyone. I climbed the steps to the stage. Dean Richardson handed me the microphone. The applause continued. I waited, letting it wash over me. Finally, the room quieted. Thank you, I began, my voice steady. This honor means more to me than you can know. I paused, gathering my thoughts. 30 years ago, I sat in these classrooms as a first-generation student. I didn't have family, connections, or financial safety nets. What I had was doubt. Doubt from others. Doubt from myself. The room was silent. I graduated top of my class, but I never practiced law. Life took me in a different direction. I became a mother. I became a school secretary. And I used my legal education every single day, advocating for students, for fairness, for those without a voice. I glanced at my table, at Diane, who couldn't meet my eyes, at Vanessa, who stared at her lap, at Trevor, whose face was ashen. The Winters First Generation Scholarship Fund exists for students who are underestimated, for students who are overlooked, for students who walk into rooms where people assume they don't belong. My voice grew stronger. I know what that feels like. I felt it tonight. The room was absolutely still. But here's what I learned. You don't need their permission to belong. You never did. A beat of silence. Then the room exploded. A standing ovation that shook the walls. Handed back the microphone and walked down the steps. People surrounded me immediately. Alumni, donors, scholarship recipients. They shook my hand, hugged me, thanked me. Diane sat at the table, staring at her lap. Vanessa mumbled something and fled the room. Trevor stood as I approached. Maya, I had no idea. I know, I said, my voice steady and calm. You never asked. He flinched. I walked past him. Daniel wrapped me in a tight hug. Mom, I'm so proud of you. I held him close, tears finally spilling. I love you, sweetheart. Around us, people kept coming. Fellow alumni sharing memories, scholarship recipients sharing gratitude. Diane and Trevor faded into the background, suddenly invisible. The VIP reception they told me wasn't for me? I was the guest of honor. At the VIP reception, I was surrounded. Admirers, fellow alumni, grateful students. Daniel stayed by my side, seeing me in an entirely new light. Diane and Trevor left early. No goodbye, no apology. Vanessa had already disappeared. Daniel leaned close as we stood together. I always knew you were amazing, he said quietly, but I didn't know the whole story. You didn't need to, I said. I didn't do any of it for recognition. Later, driving home through quiet streets, I felt lighter than I had in years. I thought about all the times I stayed quiet, all the times I made myself smaller, all the times I let them diminish me. I realized I'd been carrying pain that was never mine to carry. They spent years making me feel less than. But the truth was, I was never less. I was just different. And tonight, that difference was finally seen. I didn't need an apology from Diane. I didn't need one from Trevor or Vanessa. I didn't need their approval or their validation. For the first time in decades, their silence didn't hurt me. It freed me. My success was never measured by their standards. It was measured in sacrifice, in love, in impact. And that was more than enough. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, where you work, or what you wear, I see you. Has someone ever assumed you didn't belong, only to be proven completely wrong? Share your story below. I read every single one. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Subscribe if you believe your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Let's build a community of people who know their value, even when the world tries to tell them otherwise. Your story matters. Tell me, have you ever had a moment where you proved the doubters wrong? I want to hear it.